Agriculture is a $3.5 billion industry in New York. With over 35,000 farms, food producers need as much help as they can get to produce an abundant crop. However, some say a key component in fruit and vegetable farming is experiencing a population decline, causing the state to create a task force to study the health of pollinators.
Well, in order for us to get apples, we need cross-pollination. We need to have in the blossom is both the male and female parts, so in theory it can take care of itself, but it doesn't work that way. You need to have some pollen grains from a different variety of apple land on the blossom for the variety you're talking about in order to have the act of pollination.
Peter Tenike is a lifelong apple farmer. His family business, Indian Ladder Farms, has been producing New York's signature crop from the Capital District for a century, making Tenike something of an agricultural cupid. Flowers, he says, are more than just pretty. They're a working part of the plant, and he needs honeybees to facilitate reproduction.
The pollen grains come down, they go down the tube, and the second act is fertilization. That when the pollen grain meets the ovary inside there, you create a seed. So the more pollen grains that come down, the more ovaries are fertilized and the more seeds you have, and they produce hormones which attract the food resources that gives me a nice big apple.
But Tenike, like a lot of other farmers, rents commercial bees to fertilize his flowers. So, with the number of dead honeybees increasing, President Obama directed the Federal Department of Agriculture to study the problem and each state to form a pollinator task force. State Agriculture Commissioner Richard Ball is leading the local effort.
There's stress factors in the environment, climate change, does that play a role here? Is it pesticides? Is it fungicides? Is it the varroa mite, which is a very significant problem for bees, an actual pest of bees? Is it disease? Is it lack of good forage? And stress. How are we managing these bees? And what's the effect on wild bees? And what do we know about wild pollinators? We know about the hives that we see in someone's backyard. What about the wild pollinators? What's the effect on them of all these things? And so we really quickly, I think, identified that it was a lot of things going on here. And so all the more important to come up with a plan that we could implement quickly and as we go forward identify.
The first thing that became clear was the need to better understand the problem. So the task force turned to the team at Cornell University's Dice Lab for honeybee research in Ithaca.
There is a problem right now in terms of pollinators potentially not having the populations that they typically have and providing the services that we in New York need for our agricultural crops.
McCart says every year, 50% of the honeybee population is lost. Since honeybees are the main pollinator in New York, I donned a beekeeper suit and got a closer look at the agriculture industry's main power player with honeybee expert and Dice Lab researcher Emma Mullen.
So there are several species of bumblebees in New York, and there's only one species of honeybee in New York.
Oh.
And that's this one here.
She says honeybee colonies can include up to 40,000 individuals, but they can be plagued by disease and pests.
So varroa mites are probably the leading cause of death for honeybees here in New York.
Okay.
It's different from something called colony collapse disorder, which is often mentioned.
Yeah.
So colony collapse disorder is a very specific syndrome where you don't have adults in the colony, but you'll still have a queen, you'll still have brood, and you'll still have food stores. And normally, if there's no bees to protect the food stores, they'll get robbed by other insects. But with colony collapse disorder, nothing is coming and eating that food. So it's almost like there's something in there that other insects know is not good to eat, but we're not sure what it is.
Dice Lab researcher Scott McCart says they're still studying what, if any, pesticides are adding to the problem. He says just because a foreign chemical is present in a colony doesn't make it dangerous. They're also studying the larger pollinator population, which includes over 100 different species, such as wasps, moths, and even hummingbirds. To improve their population numbers, the state has allotted the Pollinator Task Force $500 million to determine how we can better support these working New Yorkers. Senator Tom O'Mara sits on the Senate Committee of Agriculture and is a member of the Pollinator Task Force. He says the states need to work together.
by no means an issue that's unique to New York State. It's been seen all over the country and all over the Western Hemisphere, to my knowledge, that we've seen these problems. So I know that the Cornell researchers are involved with researchers at other institutions across the country in working on different approaches to the research to try to find a cause.
Back at Indian Ladder Farms, Ten Eyck says improving our land use is a good first step in increasing the pollinator population.
The important part is to build up a population of native flowers other times of the year than the middle of bloom, so that there's something going on at other times to keep these populations alive year-round.